Welcome to Adaptation Stories, a video series about the need to adapt to climate change in Antigua and Barbuda while highlighting the work done by the Department of Environment with support from the Adaptation Fund and the Global Environment Facility. I'm Mitzi Allen. A special fund managed by the Department of Environment has created a number of success stories for residents in vulnerable communities in Antigua and Barbuda. In Part 3, our final episode of Adaptation Stories, we will share one of the success stories of people living in communities vulnerable to climate change and meet the people who are adapting to a more sustainable approach to building, planning, and living. Romario Michael is the supervisor of the Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund within the Department of Environment. The SURF Fund, as it is more commonly known, provides financing to implement the Environmental Protection and Management Act of 2019 and will serve as a main channel for funding for environmental and climate adaptation mitigation projects.
The SURF Fund, SURF stands for Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund. It's basically a fund which is used to finance and give individuals living in McKinnon's area as well as first responders access to low interest rate loans of 2% interest rate. Currently we are focusing on the McKinnon's area and the watershed area, which includes Gambles, Lower Gambles, Fort Road, Villa, Point, and those surrounding areas which are classified as the watershed area for McKinnon's, as well as first responders, where teachers, government workers, firefighters, police officers, and anyone who fall within the government umbrella has access to these loans. We have been given $4.6 million US, which is equivalent to 12.4 million Eastern Caribbean dollars, to be distributed and allocated to these areas. We are focusing on the vulnerable individuals who may have issues when it comes to climate change, such as they may not be able to stand a Cat 5 or Cat 1 even hurricane. So our aim is to allow these individuals to climate-proof their homes, for a better word, in terms of adding shutters, renewable energy, yard drainage for those persons who yard may be flood, and the list goes on and on. The next step for the SURF Fund is to expand the criteria at the project area in terms of venturing out into Cashew Hill and the surrounding areas. So Cashew Hill, when we mean Cashew Hill, we're talking about Briggins, Belmont, Golden Grove, North Grove, and those areas which are low-lying and prone to flooding. The Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund is looking to venture into first electronic vehicles, which are totally climate friendly since they don't burn fossil fuel. It has already been launched, but we're looking to roll in the first 100 set of vehicles by mid next year. For the part to 2020, it has already been launched and is in process, and that is geared towards ecotourism as well as agriculture within the southern part of the island, the Folies and the Valley estates.
My name is Christopher Burton, and I'm a technical officer at the Department of Environment. I help with the development of the grants program at the department, as well as with the implementation of Component 3 for this project. The AF project as well as SSEF, they both focus on adaptation, and Component 3 specifically focuses on supporting the social adaptive capacity and local uptake of adaptation. So the project seeks to improve resilience in community organizations. We intended to provide grant funding so that they could be more resilient to hurricanes and droughts and to serve as shelters. The grant funding ranged from $100,000 to $300,000 so that they could be awarded these grants. Even before we provided the grant funding, we had several training workshops that would have assisted them prior to their submission of their proposals as well. So we ensured that they did training workshops, not just the applicants, but also NGOs. Several NGOs participated, as well as government officers, in climate change adaptation and water management. and shelter management, as well as grant proposal writing. So they got an introduction to how they could provide their proposals and how to structure it. And we essentially partnered with groups such as the National Office of Disaster Services and the Global Environment Facilities Small Grants Program Coordinator here in Antigua. There are a number of interventions that the applicants could include in their proposals. So the project team would have provided them based on the list of adaptation interventions that this project focuses on. They could look at water and sanitation, energy efficiency, activities for flooding, drought, hurricanes, and temperature, of course. So looking specifically at these interventions, they could either have the introduction or the improvement of their rainwater harvesting systems, as well as the reuse of grey water, for instance, so reusing water systems, the installation of renewable energy systems. That includes either ground-mounted or roof-mounted solar PV systems, inclusive of battery backups. They could also have the installation of septic tanks and window shutters. So not just shutters for their windows, but also for their doors. And overall, they're meant to improve the resilience of their buildings to withstand the hurricanes or droughts, etc. So they did also structural work on their buildings. So all of these are a number of activities that they could have included. They weren't necessarily required to have all of them, but it was definitely an option for them. When we're looking at the specific interventions that the applicants could include in their proposals, it would include the introduction or the improvement of their rainwater harvesting systems, and that would also include the introduction of cisterns.
I'm Randolph Best. I'm one of the deacons with the Villa Baptist Church. The Villa Baptist Church is located within the Villa Point community, address Amy Bayer Street. We started as a mission really dating back to the early 70s. We were worshiping on Bennett Street, and then this ground here was then commissioned to build a church, quote unquote. So when you combine the two, we're talking about its existence in excess of 40 years, going on 45. We learned about the grant through an invitation letter sent out by the Environment Division. We then had a visit from members of the environment. They did a cursory walkthrough to see if we do meet the requirements for receiving that grant. Having done so, they then walked us through the pre-application or pre-qualification process, which we did. We received an initial grant writing amount, where we then produce the actual document for, the proposal, as it were, for the actual grant amount. That process took between 3 to 6 months, where they provided guidance in areas of financing, grant writing. We had to do workshops, which was actually part of the grant process, as stipulated by the donors, quote unquote. Having done so, the grant was then awarded based on the amounts that we submitted. The overall grant ceiling was 300,000 US. We requested approximately 196,000 US, which amounts to about 560,000 EC. And having received that, the project then commenced. Our proposal requested 5 main areas that we needed to look at in terms of ensuring that we meet the requirements of ensuring the building is resilient, quote unquote. And in keeping with their mandate, 3 main areas had to do with water harvesting, ensuring this structure is reinforced, primarily the roof, the main structure of the building itself, and ensuring that we also have the ability to be self-sufficient where energy is concerned. Those 3 were then broken down into a further 2, where the windows and doors was a component, because the existing windows at the time would not have sufficed had we had a hurricane pass through. So we had to add that in to ensure that the building itself was resilient. And then the wheelchair accessibility to the building, the structure, in the event that it was to be used in a hurricane setting, we had to cater for persons who are disadvantaged. The 5 different areas that we looked at in terms of the sub-projects were the solar PV system, the water harvesting system, which includes spouting the building and building a cistern, changing of the windows and doors to ensure there's resilience, the infilling of a cavity that was between the wall and the eave that we had to infill to ensure that it was resilient. The building itself is a steel frame structure with infill walls of blocks. So in itself, the roof members are strong enough to carry any dynamic load that is applied to it. In terms of strengthening the actual or the existing roof, we had to ensure that the eaves were totally sealed off to avoid any uplifting wind action that would, threaten the roof coming off, and that is where the infilling of that cavity came into play. But as it is, the steel frame structure itself was sufficient to carry any added application of load as it regards to the PV system. The benefit has to do with the enhancement of the structure itself, making it more resilient, the installation of ramps to also cater to the disadvantaged individuals who would use the facility, the enhancement of the doors and windows. We see that as a benefit, a direct spill-off of the grant that we received, but also the enhancement of our water catchment facility. The additional benefit has to do with having installed a solar photovoltaic system, which is the PV, that will lend to lowering our energy consumption in terms of the cost factor associated with such a invention. Also, the water catchment also lends to the reduction of our utility bills, having that large capacity of water. It's more than what we would need when we are worshiping on Sunday or Wednesday, and the excess we hope will be able to service the rest of the community, as it were. The benefits to the community that this project brings is that the members of the community from the Point, Villa, Yorks area, if they are adversely affected, the building is designed to carry or service up to 288 persons. Now, I know we have the challenge with the whole COVID thing and social distance and all the rest of it, but in reality, in a disaster situation, there's no way you're going to want to turn away somebody who is seeking refuge in a dire time of need. So if we were to take that into account, we're down to about 188, say 200 persons between the main hall here and the annex. So the shelter component, being able to provide shelter in time of disaster, is a spill-off as a benefit for the community. The cistern that was built is a 12,000-gallon cistern. And again, as I mentioned, the capacities are such that it's more than we need on a day when we meet to worship. So the excess, as it were, would be able to service the members of the community who might be in a position that they need water. As you know, from time to time, we struggle with water services because of water being restricted. We are in a belt, as it were, where we suffer from drought from time to time. and some people just can't afford the service in their homes. So if and when the time arises that they need the assistance with that, the cistern is there where we can provide that assistance to members of the community where they can have that service. The solar PV system, that's another spill-off as well in terms of energy.
This panel is designed to break the utility power, and this is the transformer. The system is a great interactive system. That means that it meets the policy of APWA, where excess can be directed to the grid. And at the same time, it can allow to be off-grid in case there's an outage. It is a 12 kilowatt PV array system with a capacity of 32 kilowatt hours of battery storage. That's usable energy. It is also designed to power the building approximately 1 day without the use of the sun.
The Development Control Authority is a statutory body governed by the Physical Planning Act of 2003. It has two mandates by law: development control, which approves plan applications for physical development, and development planning, which plans and manages land use both at a national level and a local planning level. Frederick Southwell is a chief town and country planner at the Development Control Authority in the Ministry of Housing, Lands, and Urban Renewal.
Department of Environment had hired a consultant to assist us, the DCA, in updating our Antigua and Barbuda building code. Our building code has been in existence from 1996, and so it's regarded as being somewhat outdated at this point. And so a consultant was hired to carry out consultations with various stakeholders as well as the public, and that was done. We use the OECS building code that was updated in 2016, the 7th edition, as the springboard. And so we used that and then saw how we could tweak it to our local conditions. Department of Environment has also assisted in revising our Antigua and Barbuda building guidelines. The building guidelines is a sister document to the building code. I have copies here. This is a copy of the building code. It's a hefty document, and the building guidelines is an addition to it. And the building guidelines, whereas the building code sets out the standards for things like concrete buildings, steel buildings, wood frame buildings, and so on. In table form, the building guidelines tend to use a lot of diagrams to illustrate what's to be done. And so the Department of Environment hired a consultant to assist in upgrading the building guidelines, and it has been completed. It has gone to public consultation, and now we're looking about ratifying it by government. We have seen in recent years the increased frequency and severity of hurricanes. Before, Category 4, Category 5 hurricane was a rarity, and in recent years they have become quite common, and these hurricanes are very destructive. The current building code makes provision for building design to withstand up to Category 3 hurricanes, and so the new building code would have building designs for buildings to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. So that's one of the changes. Another aspect of climate change we've seen is the increased length and severity of droughts. And so whereas the current building code did make provision for the harvesting and storage of rainwater, the new building code emphasizes it more so as to mitigate the problems of severe drought. We are living in a world now where we mostly depend on non-renewable fossil fuels for our energy needs. However, we understand two things: that fossil fuels will become depleted within a few years, and secondly, the use of fossil fuels is triggering increased heating of the earth, which produces the climate change problems. The call is to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, and so the new building code is making provision for buildings that would be more energy efficient. There's an aspect in it that is adapted from the Caribbean Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code, and that would seek to make buildings the need for air condition, the use of more natural ventilation and lighting, use of more windows for ventilation, for natural lighting, bigger windows to allow natural lighting, and buildings that have rooms in the middle of the building. What we're suggesting is that these middle rooms have, instead of a solid wall, you have a glass wall that would bring the sunlight from one room to the next right through the building, and that will reduce the need for artificial lighting. It also makes provision for solar energy, photovoltaic, solar heating or solar water heating, and wind energy. The response from the public to produce comments and recommendations was slow at the start. However, when the deadline approached, we started to get more feedback from the public. So that was one of the challenges we faced. Another challenge was the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we would normally meet face-to-face with the interest groups and stakeholders. We now had to organize meetings virtually. Since it was something that we were not fully accustomed to at first, it was a bit tricky, but after a while, when we got the hang of it, the operations became smoother. We have formed a technical evaluation committee made up of technical persons from the Development Control Authority and Department of Environment. We go out and assess the property that needs the loan, and make sure that the application is accurate and that the loan can be used effectively to improve the property. With our report, the Department of Environment would then see about issuing the loan to the person.
My name is Sharon Greenidge and I'm a local area plan apprentice at the Department of Environment. A local area plan is a development plan that sets in place policies and recommendations for land use development. It's also a plan that is mandated by the Physical Planning Act of 2003, and it's basically a land use plan which guides development in a particular area or parish, for example, parish or community or village. As we currently face climate change challenges, it's important to have this local area plan so we can help to mitigate against some of the effects that we face in Antigua. In St. Mary's, for example, we face flooding. So by having this development plan, we can put in place mechanisms and policies that will mitigate against these climate change effects. And also with development happening, we need to know where we can develop and how we can develop so we can protect ourselves and our lives from these challenges that we may come across. For example, we hear complaints sometimes about how development is affecting our natural ecosystems or areas on the island. So we want to put in place a policy or a guideline to prevent people from damaging or affecting these natural ecosystems. Currently, the lab is taking place in St. Mary's Parish and all of the communities within St. Mary's. In certain instances, also neighboring communities that we border on the boundary, because these communities also have the effect from St. Mary's Parish. We currently facing challenges from climate change and strong weather patterns happening now. So we want to put in place this lab in Antigua so we can know how to build in the future, better develop our land use in the future, so we can prevent the loss of lives and property and houses against, climate change effects. Within St. Mary's Parish, there's the West Palm Beach area neighborhood, and within this neighborhood, they currently experience flooding. So by having a local area plan in place, we can put in place guidelines on how to build in the future. For example, we are recommended in the lab that your house should be elevated a certain amount of meters off the ground. So it's an example of how the local area plan will help in the case of flooding in that area. Another example of how the local area plan can benefit your community, we've recommended green spaces. And in Antigua, a lot of people currently like to go outside, and we need to have green spaces which also help to improve our health. So by having these community green spaces, members can also come together and build more community cohesiveness.
And that concludes our three-part series of Adaptation Stories. I'm Mitzi Allen.
The Adaptation series is a product of the Antigua and Barbuda Department of Environment in collaboration with Hammer Films. It is funded under the Adaptation Fund project, an integrated approach to physical adaptation and community resilience in Antigua and Barbuda's Northwest McKinnon's watershed, as well as the Global Environment Facility Project, building climate resilience through innovative financing mechanisms for climate change adaptation, also known as the Special Climate Change Fund, or SCCF project. To find out more about this and other projects, please visit the Department of Environment's website at www.environment.gov.ag.